She hangs. So in the first part of really trying to make a rondel or a besicue is to actually kind of understand the history of the besicue or the rondel. So during the 14th century, rondels and besicues showed up as small round plates of steel, normally worn to protect the weak spots in a harness, which if you don't know what a harness is, it's pretty much the full plate armor or full armor that you really want to wear so you don't, disconnect from reality. The French called the armpit discs besicues, but while rondel is really just kind of more of a broad term of meaning steel disc, that normally means for protection. Some knights had them on elbows and backs of gauntlets. To start making a besicue or a rondo, what you want to do is grab something round, like I just grabbed a cutting disc and trace it on a piece of steel, cut a couple of straight lines into it with Sharpie, and make sure you get the angles nice and square. Then you want to cut it out on either a angle grinder, or I just used a shear that I got from Vector, it's like Temu, but for equipment, which is really well done. Now you want something like this, or this, which is a chisel from concrete busting from Harbor Freight. Now, this is a certain type of hammer, which people call like a fluting hammer or a rounding hammer. But to be honest with you, it just has to be kind of flat like you see there. It's kind of like a long oval. And that really helps with trying to get those parallel lines. So I'm trying to imagine this, right? When you're working, whatever surface you're doing, you just have to make sure it's almost like that crease that you're working against. Now, you want to hit off the crease or off the line. As you can see, I'm hitting off the line, and now I go on one side than the other side. So the idea is almost like clay, right? If you put clay over, like, say a knife, right, and you push it, it's going to push down the sides. You want that to happen. You only want to push the material on either side of the steak, not directly on top of the steak, because that will make the material on top very, very thin, and that will kind of defeat the purpose of the fluting. So you can see me keeping to push down that material very slowly. You want to take your time. Now, I like kind of flaring it out every time. So if I want to start on a new line, I like hitting it a little, with a little more beans to really define that, caving in, or almost that little concave. And now you want to work on both sides. You want to kind of stay pretty consistent with that. Just take your time, and you can see me here just doing the same exact thing I've been saying, hitting on the other side of the line. Now, if you ever want to make your own steaks, also you can see here that kind of shininess. But if you ever want to make your own steaks, just pick up a box of railroad spikes or go to your local railroad. I'm not totally, saying you should do this, but you can go find some. Also, you see me switching between steaks here. This is mainly just due to, this one's sharper, so I can really define my lines. And I just go slow passes again on either side of the line, almost like working into the side of the chisel to really define that line. And what I mean by that is, remember how I was saying hit on the side? Now you hit down on the sides, but if you want to really define that crease, you almost hit on the side but facing towards the steak, so it kind of squishes it around the steak, and just slow passes. Here, you don't need a lot of tools. You don't need heat or anything crazy. You need a good file so you can file off your chisels like this right here. And I'm filing this mainly because it was marking up my material, which is not good, because that will pretty much leave a really shoddy finish and polish everything. If you're going to get a couple of hammers, get a couple other like ball peen hammers at like Harbor Freight, or a mason hammer, then you can sand off the one side, but you have to make sure all your hammers are a decent polish. So what you can do is grab a little WD-40 and a little sandpaper, and you just, put her into it. You start sanding, you start polishing. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, just enough, because whatever is on the surface that you're hitting against or into is going to reflect on your metal. So it's, if you want a high polish everything. If you're okay with just like, a satin polish, you don't gotta go crazy. Fun fact about besicues and rondels. So if we look at a lot of historical sources, actually, there's not a lot of examples of showing how to mount a rondel or besicue. So a lot of the time it's up for interpretation on how it works and just through, working it. And that's a lot of things when it comes to armoring stuff. is, if you're new to this, a lot of it is interpretation, and it's a lot up to the viewer, and so it's a great thing to really study about. But back onto this, you can kind of see me planishing it a little bit. So planishing is pretty much smaller strikes that aren't super heavy to kind of remove some of the larger hammer marks, and so it gives you that nice smooth finish. And the whole project, start to finish on this Rondel, is gonna be very little finish. No sanding, no nothing. It could just be straight, cold forge, which you can do a lot of things cold forge. Fun fact, you can do van braces, you can do almost full arm harnesses, depends how dedicated you are. Obviously, if you're that guy, you can do everything cold forged. So as it starts forming, it actually starts concaving in a little bit. So it's gonna get a little trickier. While you're forming it. So the thing, what I mean by being a little trickier is, so there's something called work hardening. So work hardening is something that normally is really sought after for in mild steel armor, and pretty much what that is you keep working it to a certain degree where it just hardens, and so many small hammer strikes just make it really durable. Now, as you can see here, I am also insanely just trying to planish, trying to get all those little hammer marks out, small taps, nothing crazy, just little tiny tip taps. And what you can also do is just grab a really flat hammer and do this yourself. And if you just have any normal piece of armor, you can do planishing two ways. You can do a really round surface, hammering, like a big, really round hammer, hammering onto a flat surface. Or vice versa, a really round stake and a flat hammer, hammering on top. So this is the final product right there, of just from a very cold forge perspective in Planish. Now you can see that I'm kind of trying to square up where I can drill the center hole, where we can add a rivet so we can rivet leather to the back. Now I'm just taking extra precaution there to check to see if I was kind of on spot. Now I just have a drill, the classic D-wall, and I just kind of center. After a certain bit, nothing's ever perfect, so you just might as well full send, and instead of just freaking out about it. So this part is going to be where it gets a little janky. So I use a rivet here. That rivet's from called Athena. It's just a dome head mushroom rivet. And this leather is actually from my apron that I just cut off because I had some with some shears. Some good old rusty shears. But anything could work, a knife or... So the next part, we're going to be really trying to rivet this onto everything. So you want to punch a hole through the leather. I just use the same hole punch I used to cut the steel to go through the old hole and through the leather to make a new hole. I just grab a nail to run past it. So normally when you do leather, you want a washer, and you see me making one out of old steel. You can just cut a small rectangle of old steel, round it, and then you got a washer. Boom. So when you rivet, you want to get the rivet, and you want to have, not a crazy bit sticking out. But you want to slowly peen the sides first. So you want to go outside in because you want to push that material out so it can hold the washer and hold everything in place. Now I would also suggest to take your time with this and go into a lead block or wood so it kind of takes the hit for you. I appreciate y'all sticking along, and I know this is kind of like a rushed little tutorial, but I hope you learned a little bit of something. Now, again, I'm still learning myself, and I still have a lot of things to learn, and I have a lot of things to, still work on, so I hope you learn from any of my mistakes, and just be careful. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments. Make sure you subscribe, and make sure you polish your hammers and surfaces, because that will bite you in the butt. But yeah, thank you, and I'll see you later.